While most teams welcomed the canceled Middle East races as a rare mid-season break, Ferrari saw something very different. Not a break, not a reset, a deadline. Because what happened at Suzuka was not just a poor result, it was a warning. From an engineering perspective, the data tells a far more unsettling story. The SF26 is not simply lacking pace. It behaves like a car that is out of sync with itself. Balance shifts that should be predictable are not. Grip does not build the way it should. The driver is constantly reacting instead of attacking. This is the kind of problem you cannot hide with setup changes or strategy calls. It points to something deeper in the car's fundamentals. And for Ferrari, this unexpected pause is no longer about finding performance. It is about understanding a machine that no longer behaves the way it was designed to. The core problem: drag versus energy. Ferrari's problem at Suzuka was not simply a lack of power. It was far more fundamental than that. The issue lay in how the car was using its energy, and the picture that emerges from the data is deeply concerning. Lap after lap, Lewis Hamilton was reaching the electrical limit well before the braking zones, roughly 300 meters too early. In modern Formula 1, where energy deployment is everything, that is not a small inefficiency. It is a structural failure. It means the car is running out of usable electrical boost at the exact moment it should still be accelerating at full force. The reason behind it is even more alarming. The MGUK was not being used purely to add performance. Instead, a significant portion of that energy was being spent just to overcome aerodynamic resistance. In other words, the car was fighting the air more than it was attacking the track. This points directly to an aerodynamic imbalance at a fundamental level. The car is generating downforce, but at a cost that is simply too high. Drag is consuming energy faster than the system can sustain, forcing the driver into a defensive mode long before the end of each straight. That is not just a setup issue, it is a sign that the entire aerodynamic concept is out of alignment with the demands of modern Formula 1. A package and a half, not an upgrade, a reset. Ferrari did not plan for a radical change this early in the season. The roadmap was measured, controlled, and predictable. A few aerodynamic refinements in Miami, followed by a major upgrade later in Imola. That was the intention. Suzuka changed everything. Being outpaced so heavily in race conditions forced a complete rethink. Not a small adjustment, but a full shift in urgency. What was once a structured development timeline became a race against time inside the factory. Engineers accelerated production, reworked priorities, and pushed components forward far earlier than originally scheduled. In less than 2 weeks, Ferrari condensed what should have been weeks of validation, manufacturing, and testing into a single intense push. Parts that were never supposed to appear until much later in the season are now being rushed to the car. This is no longer about refining performance step by step. It is about forcing a solution under pressure. Inside the paddock, this approach has earned a very specific label, not because of how many parts are being introduced, but because of what it represents. 2 separate phases of development combined into one high-risk attempt to correct the direction of the car. This is not an upgrade in the traditional sense, it is a reset. Aerodynamics, fixing the drag tax. Ferrari's biggest enemy right now is not a lack of downforce. It is the price they are paying for it. Every bit of grip the car generates is coming with a penalty that is too costly on the straights, and in modern Formula 1, that trade-off is unacceptable. The focus for Miami is not about adding more performance. It is about making the performance usable. The first major area of change is the rear wing system. The original design struggled with stability during rapid transitions, especially when switching between low drag and high downforce modes. At speeds above 300 km per hour, even the smallest instability becomes a serious problem. The updated version introduces a more refined actuator system, a cleaner internal layout, and better weight distribution. The goal is simple: keep the wing stable, keep the airflow clean, and unlock higher straight line speed without compromising control. If this works as intended, the car gains a meaningful advantage on long straights like Miami. The second focus is the floor, which is the foundation of ground effect performance. At Suzuka, the data showed clear signs of instability through high-speed corners, forcing the driver to hesitate on throttle application. That hesitation costs lap time, but more importantly, it destroys confidence. The revised floor edge design aims to better manage airflow under changing conditions such as braking and pitch movement. By stabilizing the aerodynamic balance, the car allows earlier throttle input and a more predictable response through fast sections. This is where consistent lap time is built. The final piece of the puzzle is packaging. The original bodywork was too conservative. prioritizing cooling at the expense of aerodynamic efficiency. The updated design tightens everything at the rear, refining the shape to reduce turbulence before the airflow reaches the rear wing. On its own, this kind of change might seem small, but in Formula One, small improvements combine into meaningful gains. When airflow is cleaner, drag is reduced, and every straight becomes an opportunity instead of a limitation. Taken together, these changes are not about chasing peak numbers. They are about removing the hidden losses that have been holding the car back. Ferrari is not trying to make the car faster in one area. They are trying to stop it from wasting performance everywhere. Weight reduction. Why 4 kilograms matters. In Formula One, performance is often decided by margins so small they are almost invisible. Ferrari understands this better than most, which is why even a few kilograms can become a critical battleground. What looks insignificant on paper can translate into a decisive advantage on track. By refining internal cooling pathways and reworking the engine cover with a more advanced carbon structure, Ferrari has managed to cut around 4 kilograms from the car. That kind of reduction does not sound dramatic, but in this level of motorsport, it directly impacts lap time, tire wear, and overall balance. Every kilogram removed improves acceleration, braking, and cornering efficiency. Over a single lap, the gain may seem modest, but across a qualifying session or a full race distance, it becomes a powerful advantage. When the fight at the front is measured in hundredths of a second, this kind of improvement can be the difference between starting on the front row or getting stuck behind. Power unit, the ADU update. Ferrari's biggest opportunity for recovery may not come from aerodynamics at all, but from deep inside the engine itself. Because right now, the real limitation is not how the car moves through the air, but how efficiently it turns fuel into usable performance. Falling behind the benchmark has opened a rare window. Under the current regulations, that deficit allows Ferrari access to additional development opportunities, giving them a chance to push their power unit further than the front-running teams. And they are not wasting it. The focus is on re-engineering the combustion process at a fundamental level. By reshaping the piston crown, refining the pre-chamber ignition system in collaboration with Shell, and pushing compression closer to the technical limit, Ferrari is aiming to extract more energy from every combustion cycle. This is not about adding power in the traditional sense. It is about increasing efficiency in a way that translates directly into performance on track. The impact of this shift is significant. A stronger and more efficient internal combustion engine reduces the dependence on electrical deployment. Instead of relying on the MGUK to compensate for weaknesses, the power unit becomes more balanced, more predictable, and more effective across an entire lap. This is a return to fundamentals. The engine takes back its role as the primary source of performance, while the hybrid system returns to what it was always meant to be: a tool to enhance, not something that has to carry the car. Software eliminating the clipping ghost. One of Ferrari's most damaging weaknesses in Japan was not visible to the eye, but it was brutally clear in the data. At critical moments on the straights, the car simply stopped delivering electrical performance. Not because the system had nothing left to give, but because it was forced to protect itself. Thermal limits were cutting into output, forcing a reduction in electrical power just when maximum acceleration was needed. For the driver, this feels like the car suddenly losing its edge. The push fades, the momentum drops, and any chance of defending or attacking disappears in seconds. This is what engineers refer to as clipping, and at Suzuka, it was happening far too early. For Miami, Ferrari is taking a completely different direction. Instead of reacting to energy limits, the system is now designed to anticipate them. By reading fine driver inputs such as throttle modulation and braking behavior, the car can predict energy demand before it actually happens. That allows it to harvest, store, and deploy energy in a far more controlled and efficient way. The goal is to stretch the usable power window deeper into every straight. When the system works as intended, the drop-off in electrical assistance happens later, giving the driver sustained acceleration for longer. This changes the dynamic completely. Instead of becoming vulnerable halfway down the straight, the car remains competitive where it matters most. For Hamilton, this is not just a technical improvement. It is the difference between being exposed and being able to fight back. Hamilton's role beyond driving. Lewis Hamilton's impact at Ferrari goes far beyond what happens behind the wheel. This is no longer just a driver adapting to a car. It is a driver actively reshaping the way the car is conceived, developed, and refined. He brings with him a deep understanding of what a championship-winning car should feel like, built from years of experience at the very highest level. That knowledge is now being fed directly into Ferrari's development process. From studying past design philosophies to working closely with key figures inside the aerodynamic department, Hamilton is influencing decisions at a level few drivers ever reach. One of the most important aspects of this shift lies in driving style. The car was originally designed around a concept that favors a smoother, more rounded approach through corners. That does not align with Hamilton's natural instinct, which relies on sharper rotation and a more aggressive change of direction. Instead of forcing the driver to adapt, Ferrari is beginning to reshape the car around him. This is where the real transformation begins. For years, development has leaned heavily on simulation and theoretical models. Now, real driver feedback is being given greater weight in the decision-making process. That changes the dynamic inside the team. It introduces a human element into a system that has often been dominated by data. And that shift matters, because when a driver of Hamilton's caliber starts to influence not just setup, but philosophy, the result is no longer just a faster car. It is a car that makes sense to the person driving it. Thermal management, the hidden limit. Heat is often the silent factor that decides performance in Formula One, and Miami is the kind of circuit that turns it into a defining constraint. Under extreme temperatures, every system on the car is pushed closer to its limits, and any weakness that remains hidden in cooler conditions becomes impossible to ignore. For Ferrari, this is not just about keeping components within safe operating ranges. It is about unlocking performance that was previously being held back. By refining airflow through these cooling systems and stabilizing battery temperatures more effectively, the team is aiming to maintain consistent power delivery even under sustained thermal stress. When temperatures are controlled, the car no longer needs to reduce output to protect itself. Electrical systems can operate at full potential for longer periods, and the driver experiences a car that remains strong and predictable instead of fading over a lap. This kind of stability is not always visible, but it directly translates into lap time. In conditions like Miami, where heat builds lap after lap, even a small improvement in thermal efficiency can create a meaningful gap. Performance is no longer just about power or aerodynamics. It is about how well the entire system can manage the invisible forces that try to limit it. What to watch in FP1? If you really want to understand whether Ferrari has fixed its problems, FP1 will tell you everything you need to know. Not through lap times, not through headlines, but through how the car behaves in the details that only show up when you know where to look. Start with how often the driver can stay fully committed on throttle. At Suzuka, there were too many moments where the car forced hesitation, especially through fast sections. If that number rises, it means the rear is finally stable enough to trust. If it does not, then the same underlying weakness is still there, just hidden behind new parts. Then look at the straight line behavior. Watch how the car accelerates as it approaches the braking zone. A healthy system will keep building speed deep into the straight, holding its electrical performance instead of fading early. If the acceleration drops off too soon, the problem has not been solved. It has only been managed. Finally, focus on what happens the moment the driver exits a corner. A well-sorted car will compress, find traction, and launch forward with confidence. That clean transition from corner to straight is a clear sign that the suspension and aerodynamic platform are working together. If you start to see that kind of behavior, then Ferrari is moving in the right direction. If not, then the reset is still incomplete. Technical verdict. From a pure engineering standpoint, what Ferrari is bringing is not an upgrade in the traditional sense. It is a fundamental correction to the car's underlying philosophy, something teams usually avoid attempting in the middle of a season. What this really reveals is a shift in mindset. The original concept was built with caution, prioritizing stability and predictability, but in doing so, it limited the car's true potential. Now, that approach is being challenged from within. Ferrari is no longer protecting a concept that is not delivering. Instead, they are pushing beyond their initial boundaries, reworking key areas of the car, even if it means operating closer to the limits of reliability and control. This is a calculated risk, not a desperate move, and it signals a team that is willing to evolve rather than settle. At this stage, the question is no longer whether the car can be improved. It is whether Ferrari can successfully transform it fast enough to stay in the fight. Is it enough? The real question is not whether Ferrari has improved. It is whether the improvement is enough to matter in a field this competitive. Right now, the gap to the front is still significant, measured in more than a second over a lap. But the projected gains from these changes are not small. Higher top speed, stronger power delivery, and better efficiency across the lap all combine into a meaningful step forward. If those gains translate as expected, the deficit could shrink to a fraction of what it once was. And that is where everything changes. In modern Formula One, being close is often more important than being perfect. Once a car is within range, the entire dynamic shifts. Slipstream begins to work in your favor. Energy deployment becomes more effective. DRS opens opportunities that simply do not exist when the gap is too large. What looks like a small improvement on paper can trigger a chain reaction on track. The difference between chasing and fighting is not measured in seconds. It is measured in proximity. And if Ferrari can close that distance, even without fully matching the leaders, they put themselves back into the race in a way that numbers alone cannot fully capture. Conclusion: Suzuka did more than expose weaknesses. It marked the point where Ferrari could no longer continue with the same car philosophy. What arrives in Miami is not a continuation. It is an attempt to rebuild direction under pressure, but with a much clearer understanding of where the limits truly are. This version of the car is not defined by raw speed alone. It is defined by how intelligently it uses what it has. Aerodynamics that aim to reduce waste instead of chasing extremes. Energy systems that deliver power where it matters instead of fading at the worst moments. And for the first time, a platform that begins to reflect the instincts of the driver rather than forcing compromise. All of that points to a team that has recognized its mistakes and is actively correcting them. But recognition is only the first step. Execution is what decides everything. The gap to the front has not disappeared. And in a championship where development never stands still, the benchmark continues to move. So the real test is no longer about understanding the problem. It is about whether Ferrari can translate that understanding into enough performance, quickly enough to stay relevant. Because at this level, progress is not measured by improvement alone. It is measured by whether you can catch a target that is still accelerating away.